Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of In Lay Terms. I'm your host, Payman Ascari, and my guest today is Mr. Chris Varga. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Payman. Appreciate you having me.
No, thanks for coming on, Chris. You are a PPC candidate in Vancouver Centre, correct?
That's correct.
And
In the
you're not
downtown.
under, yeah, but you're not under as much stress as our candidate Ian Kennedy is right now, right?
No, no, and honestly, I wish him the best of luck. I know it was unexpected, and I know many of us are, we're hoping for the best, and I'm trying to help him currently as much as I can. So if we can get the signatures and get the election underway, I'm ready to get it started for him.
Good stuff, and good man. You're helping him out.
Yeah.
Uh, Chris, why don't we start with a little background about you?
Well, it's a bit of a long story, but so I'll start from the top. I was born in 1993 in Mississauga, Ontario, to be exact. I came from Hungarian immigrated parents. They came from Budapest about a year or the year of before the German Wall fell. So they immigrated to Canada, and I was born in Mississauga. So I grew up the first 5, 10 years of my life was there. And then from there, we actually moved on to the US, where I lived in the United States for majority of my teenage and late teens, early 20s. So I went to high school there, and more specifically in San Francisco, California area, so Bay Area. And basically, I went to school there. I grew up there for the most part of my growing up teens life, and then we eventually moved over to Vancouver Island. My father was unfortunately diagnosed with cancer, so we passed away while we moved up. But since then, I lived in Vancouver Island for about a good 10 years before migrating over to Vancouver and met my fiance, and I've been here ever since.
First of all, I'm sorry for your loss. So
Oh,
maybe,
thank you. Yeah, it's been a few years now, so it was a long time ago. Very unexpected, unfortunately, but fortunately during the COVID years as well. So hospitals were not the greatest at the time to visit.
yeah.
Yeah.
Um, what prompted you to move to the U.S. first of all?
Well, it was more so on my family's side. So, as I said, I was born in Mississauga. My dad was actually a winemaker by trade. So he went to university in Budapest, Hungary, and then he got a scholarship opportunity from Budapest, which was under communism at the time, to travel over to Canada and do an internship. Yeah, this was during the 80s, and he was one of 10 students who were able to come over and do that. So he did that, and then came back and he was able to get a work visa while he was there. So he brought my mom over, and the two of them started a life together in Mississauga. That's where I was born in 1993. My brother was born 2 years later, and basically worked in a winery as a winemaker assistant. That was how he started, and then he upgraded or promoted to a winemaker full time. But then we had eventually got an opportunity, or my father got an opportunity in the states, in Washington State, more specifically. So we ended up moving from Mississauga, Ontario, over to Washington State, so coast to coast, and he was able to make it work with his work visa at the time. In the 90s, it was a lot easier, and so I lived there for a little bit, and essentially, I moved back to Canada after my father got sick, and I've been here ever since. Sorry, I may have forgotten a bit of your question early on, what you
I
were
guess I
saying.
was kind of hinting at. Did you guys apply for U.S. citizenship, and why did you not
So
stay?
I was actually, sorry to interrupt, I was actually the first Canadian citizen in the family. So my parents moved to Canada in 1988, and then I was born in 93. So they were still in the process of getting their citizenship via PR. They actually had two choices. They could have gone to Australia, which my dad wanted to go to, and my mom wanted to go to Canada at the beginning there. But the Australians wanted more tradespeople, whereas my parents both had master's degrees. My mom was in the science field, and my dad was in the viticulture, so winemaking. So Canada basically took them in right away, off those credentials, and They were in the process of PR and getting their citizenship, and then I was born before they could get that. So that kind of sped up the process when that happened. My brother was born in 1993. So we were full-fledged citizens basically by 1996, 95. And we lived there for a good 5 years. And then 2000, my dad had an opportunity to go to Washington State, and we lived there for a little bit while he was working. I ended up moving back to Canada after later on in my life, probably after high school, and I've been here ever since, about since 2012. So,
I'm kind of curious to get an understanding of what life was like in San Francisco versus what it was like on Vancouver Island.
not too different. My personal experience was West Coast was basically the same. So if you're in California, Oregon, Washington, BC, Vancouver Island, the mentality, the way people speak, the way people see life in general was very similar. I didn't see much of a difference aside from the monetary difference and the fiscal stuff, but it was very similar, especially in the politics. As soon as I go up to Vancouver, everybody is under the Democrat side of left leaning. I noticed that right away as a child, and my parents kind of influenced that in me off the bat. I'll probably go back a little bit. My family actually escaped communism during the 80s when they came over to Canada. So it was still under the communist regime back in the 80s, and my dad had, due to his opportunity to come via internship, he was able to bring my mother over so the two of them could start get a permit and live here. So they knew very early on that that was not where they wanted to be, and they sacrificed, a lot of their cousins and family just to come over here and start a new life. I didn't see a whole in regards to when I moved between San Francisco and Vancouver Island. I didn't see a huge difference in regards to politics or mannerisms of how people interacted and how people saw the government or the society. It was very similar. So I always chalked it up to the West Coast vibe. That's what everybody kind of called it. That we're very similar in that essence. But if of course if you go a bit more East Coast, you see the difference in opinion.
Yeah, I always say the people in Toronto are infinitely more intimidating than we are.
Yeah, I noticed that too. They're much more in your face, and they're willing to tell you something they don't like. Over on the West Coast, we're a bit more nicer to each other, and we don't want to offend. That's the same in San Francisco Bay Area where I grew up. It was that same mentality.
It's amazing how that works out. Uh,
Yeah.
one question: how old were your parents when they came here? Do you know?
So they came here in the late 80s, so 87, 88. I want to say they were about their late 20s, maybe mid 20s.
Wow, they're pretty young.
Yeah. Oh yeah. My funny story, not to detract, but my father first came, he'd never been on a plane. He traveled first by himself. He came over from communist Hungary at the time. And of course, it's all this paperwork. He has to promise he'll return. And if he doesn't return, they'll take his passport. He will never travel again, blah, blah, blah. But he's first time traveling. He actually checked in everything, even his carry on bag, everything that had his passport, had all his identification. And he just got on the plane. He arrived in the States about 12 hours later, and he had nothing. At customs, they basically asked him, like, well, where are you coming from? And he's like, he couldn't speak a lick of English, a little bit, but he tried to explain to them, oh, it's all in my bag. And after they figured that out, they kind of gauged him and what he was doing and what he wanted to be here for, and they let him in. But he always referred to that as well as like, you know, don't do what I did. So especially when you're traveling, keep all your personal items close.
I feel
So
like something like that could never happen today because there's like 15 passport checks before you
mm-mm,
can get on the plane.
that's correct. They were very lax. He was after 9/11 that all changed because we would travel back to Hungary after so the German wall came down in '89. Hungary became a bit more free. So the travel restrictions were lifted. You can travel anywhere you wanted at that point. And whenever we did, he would always bring that up. He's like, keep your passports under your like with you. Don't pack anything else away. Right? He knew from experience.
Yeah, the closest I've ever come to that is the passport fell out of my pocket while I was getting off the plane, and they
Yeah,
wouldn't let me get back on the plane to find the passport.
yeah, yeah. But even back then, they were much more. He was always saying they were much more relaxed, and plane tickets were a lot cheaper too compared to what we pay for now.
My dad told me a story. He said the first time that
Hmm.
he ever flew anywhere, his
Yeah.
buddy like drove him onto the tarmac right up to the plane. He bought his ticket from the captain. He took his luggage and he put it in the seat next to him. Like
I
that
love
would be a
that.
dream right now. Like right
Wouldn't
like
that
that
be wouldn't that be so great right now if we could do that? I think many people would vote for that. It's just going through the airport right now is miserable.
should
So
add that as a policy platform on the website.
yeah, yeah, it's a bit too regulated. So
Yeah,
but yeah, so sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to continue with that story. We both live in Vancouver. I'm in Whistler, I guess. But whenever I have a
Mhm.
flight now, like if the flight's at noon, I leave the house at like 7 a.m. You never know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, I'm in Vancouver downtown, but the airport's in Richmond, so I always plan 2, 3 hours as well if I need to leave, just based off the security and all the regulation you gotta go through, especially if you're going out of country. It's not worth it.
Yeah.
So, and we've all missed a plane too. We don't wanna be there.
Oh man,
So,
it's just the worst. Like it's just such a night. I don't know how I used to do it. I used to travel for work.
yeah.
Now I just I don't even like going to the store.
Yeah, I used to have to go to the East Coast every now and then, and, just a 5-hour flight. It's like you're adding 5 plus 4 for the whole travel and everything. Like, oh god, like I'm so glad I'm not doing that either.
Yeah, I'm
So
actually reminded. I have another stupid story. I flew to
yeah.
Toronto and I left my driver's license on the plane.
Oh.
And I
Oh
didn't
no.
realize until I got the hotel, and they almost
Yeah.
didn't let me fly back. Like,
Really?
I just figured if it's your own country, they can somehow vet you, but they won't. And the only reason they let me
Yeah.
fly is because I used to live in Toronto, and the RCMP guy, like, he managed to find my old address.
Oh really? Interesting. I would have thought just based off the info on your ticket, they would have been able to find that. No.
I don't know. I mean, if you lose your passport overseas, it's easier to get home than if you lose your passport in the country.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about it. I mean, now since 9/11, everything's just become much more. And I was a kid. I remember seeing it on my TV in school, and since then, everything's just become so strict. Like, just to even go domestic flights, they're very they're on your ass quite a bit. So,
Yeah. What do we got? We got a question from Gary or a comment. San
all
Francisco
right,
and then
Gary.
Vancouver Island. I'll need to see his updated deprogramming certificate.
Well, deprogramming happened early on, so don't worry. Basically, I was my father. My father was actually a politician back in Hungary. Not he was more of a local candidate. Essentially, he ran for the right-leaning party at the time. And he was already instilling in me and my brother how granted, we moved. So sorry, let me retract a little bit. So I lived in U.S. and Canada, but for a short period of my time, we moved back to Hungary. This was due to my grandparents were ill, and on both sides, my mom and my dad. So we had to go back and stay with them for a little bit until they unfortunately passed away. We were there for a good 3 4 years, and my dad naturally he was already quite patriotic, and he got tired of the system because we had the Communist Party was unfortunately in power between the year I could be wrong right now, but it might be between 2000 2004, and he was quite adamant against it. So as we were living there, my dad was working as a winemaker at the time. He decided to run for office for his local district at the time. They run off parliamentary system as well, and unfortunately, he didn't win the race, but, as we were going, I vividly remember him telling me everything about how to look at the way the news speaks to us, to look at the way things are portrayed, and to understand what freedom really means, and what in Hungary, they were already doing this 20 years ago. They were saying everything's democratic, and that I love the word itself, but they know how to spin it in a way to make it seem like whatever you believe that is actually freedom is not really freedom. It's just whatever they dictate it is. So my dad was very adamant against that. He ran for the rights, most right-leaning party, similar to the PPC at the time. And when he was running, we used to have police stationed outside our house every day, just watching us. They wanted this, well, him more so than me, but watching him, wanted to see where he was going, what he was doing. And I remember I would be scared shitless. Like in my house, I'd be looking out the window, like, why are they going to arrest dad? Or are they gonna come in and get all of us? And he obviously he kept everything. It wasn't that type of country where they would do something like that, but they still had the power to at least intimidate you. And I could see that because he was pulled over almost every single other day for anything. They just wanted to check his car, whether he was drinking, and he wasn't. But there any reason they could find to pull him over as soon as he pulled off of our lot. There was times where I was in the car where he got pulled out, handcuffed, put into his car, put into the police car, and then I have to wait there 20 minutes, and then he'd come back and say, "Okay, everything's good. You guys are free to leave." And he would explain to us like the reason they're doing this is because I'm running, and that they don't want freedom and they don't want democratic candidates. This is their way of intimidating him, and I saw this very early on. Unfortunately, things didn't quite work out in Hungary. He lost the election. He naturally he didn't win. The Communist Party ended up winning his district, and to the life of me, I still don't know why. But I was 10 years old, 9 years old at the time. But after that, he was quite targeted even more. Um, we were hoping. I know my mom was telling me we were hoping that things would have died down, but they didn't. So we ended up moving back over to the States after that. So to the question that the person was asking, I was definitely never on the left leaning. Yeah, where is it? Deep. I was never on the leftist programming from the get go. I saw it right off the bat. As soon as I got to California, it looked the same to me. Growing up, the only difference was I had a voice and I could actually stand up for myself. I could actually speak my opinion. Whereas in Hungary, as a child, I was fearing that I would actually get arrested. Granted, it was probably not going to happen, but that's the fear that was already implemented into me when seeing what was going on with my father at the time. So, yeah, I'm definitely not. Yeah, to answer the person's question, I'm definitely not on that programming. I was very much for freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and I was always conservative leaning growing up. And I went to a liberal high school and a liberal college, so I heard a lot of the programming up close and personal, especially the professors.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah.
I guess the next question, where I'm leading back to Vancouver, what were the
Mhm.
differences you saw between Vancouver Island and where you are now in Vancouver?
I mean, and politically, or you mean, or socially, or
The answer might actually just be nothing, but like I'm assuming, like, where did you live in Vancouver Island?
Nanaimo to be exact. So I lived in Nanaimo for a good. I moved up to Vancouver Island from California in 2012, 2013, maybe even 14. But I moved up to Nanaimo around then. I went to VIU, Vancouver Island University. That's where I pursued my marketing and digital media degree. So I have experience with film, photography, marketing. That's where I started my career. The island obviously was a lot more slower paced. People are a lot more relaxed at the time, a lot more chill. And one thing I saw at the time, which many people live on the near or been to the island understand now, you would see hitchhikers everywhere, and there were a lot of people who were just they'd just be standing on the highways, and you can pick them up and you can drive them up wherever. The fear of crime was not there. So I moved there right at the tail end of that, because I remember driving and being like, this person insane that they want to get picked up and drive. Like, they would have signs going to Victoria, and then we're in the Nanaimo. I'd be like, this person insane, they could get murdered. And in California, we were already experiencing some of that crime. So I moved up to Vancouver, and I remember seeing that and thinking like, well, people are a lot more Vancouver Island. People are a lot more relaxed than I'm used to. Of course, I go over to the mainland, and it's more similar to California. People are much more reserved. Um, there's unfortunately an appeal here where nobody wants to be hated. So it was the same in California. Everybody wants to be in their clique, especially if it's a politically social clique. So everything's like nobody wants to be against the grain here, and that's the same in Vancouver as it is. I've noticed in Oregon as well as California and San Francisco Bay Area especially. And if you look at San Francisco now, I wouldn't say it's a vacation spot 10 years later. So, and but so I worry that Vancouver's about 5, 10, maybe 5 years behind going that route.
5 years behind going in what route?
San Francisco's route. Sorry, just with the rise in homelessness and just crime. We have our own bit here. I've seen it. I work in downtown. I see it, and it's not. It's bad, but it's not as bad as it is in the Bay Area. So, and I have close friends who are living over there who, for example, can't go downtown to the bars anymore. It's not worth it to them, especially during what areas and what time.
I always thought that Vancouver was like the worst place on the planet for, Hastings and Maine, like massive drug use and homelessness. And then I went to San Francisco and I was like, holy, this place is worse. It's actually
Yeah.
worse.
I'm not sure if it's LA. It's probably LA, but they basically have what's called Skid Row over there. So it's probably LA what I'm talking about, but they have their own. It's much worse, and the people I've grown up with over there, the fact that they accept it, and I still see it on their social medias. Half of them voted for Kamala, and I'm like, what are you guys doing? Like, you want to live like this? But the problem is over there is. Um, a lot of my childhood friends, I'm speaking subjectively on my childhood friends basis, they've never left the state. So they don't understand what it's like to go somewhere else and see that this homelessness, this crime rate doesn't exist anywhere else. They've gotten so used to it that they think it's everywhere else as well. And that's why Californians, unfortunately, they never vote anything but Democrat, because they can't see it. They can't see more than their own viewpoint of the state. They think California represents the best state in the country, and maybe that was 30, 40 years ago, but it's definitely not that anymore. And a lot of them are still so in the hole that they don't want to see it. Go to Texas, you won't see all that homelessness that they see in San Francisco.
I did a road trip from Florida back to Vancouver, and I
Nice.
went from Florida north to roughly South Dakota, and then I went west. And
Yeah.
everything, like the infrastructure from Florida all the way to Washington, I think Idaho is the state next to it. I think
Hmm.
so. And
Or
every
yeah, yeah.
is it Idaho? What potato
No,
country?
next
Idaho.
to. Oh, I'd have to look it up to be sure, but it's been so long. I got you.
But
Don't worry.
yeah, no. So in any case, like the infrastructure was amazing. Like you can drive. There's so many roads. The gas stations are
Mhm.
big, and then you get to Washington. It's just it just sucks. The roads
So
suck.
Georgia or Alabama? Yeah.
Those are the ones next to Washington State.
Yeah, Georgia or Alabama? Oh, Washington State. Sorry, I thought you said Florida. Yeah, you're right, Idaho. Yeah.
Yeah, so Idaho was my last stop, and it still felt like a red state where people had
Mhm.
freedom and everything worked. And then you get to Washington, it's like a communist nightmare.
And really it is. I don't know how to explain it other than just democratic policies, right? And that's why they had what was the at least 10 years ago, it was popular when people were talking about seceding. If you had California, Oregon, Washington, Vancouver, or BC, secede that into its own country. That was the whole
Really?
thing. But like, oh yeah, yeah, you can look it up. Like 10 years ago, that was the whole popular thing. Like we might as well be our own country because everybody's on the same page. And at the time, I was like, oh, so you want like a communist hellhole? Is that what that's what you're promoting right now? But yeah, that's why. But when I moved up to BC, I could see it made a lot of sense with the mentality in those three states and ours. It's all on the same page. I don't know how, but it is.
Yeah, I wonder if it's the weather and the climate. It's just life is easy here.
West Coast. I want to call it West Coast, like paradise. You know, because they got people who had their parents who grew up in the '80s and '90s, and it was the best. Probably at the time, it was the best time to live there. And then they raise their kids, and they don't. They can't give up that lifestyle. I would say lifestyle because they don't. As it's gradually getting worse, nobody sees what it was before. So if they did a whole 180, maybe they would.
I guess it brings us to the main question. What
Sure.
possessed you to run for office?
Well, a lot of reasons, but I always wanted to run for office, to be honest with you. Ever since my father ran, I knew that's something I wanted to do, and this was back in 2004, 3 or 4. I remember watching him on the TV, seeing him debate other people and the other candidates in Hungary, and I just knew it was something I wanted to do. I he would always talk to me about he was doing this for us, like the future is for you guys. Before all the changes happen, it won't be until you're an adult, and you'll see it then. And I always kept that with me in my head. And then, as he passed away, unfortunately. And then as I got older, I was already doing volunteer work with the PPC and the NIMO, so I always knew I was going to be a candidate, but I never felt ready in my early to mid 20s. And now I'm 31 now, so I feel like I have enough experience, and I was always going to go with the PPC. I never trusted the conservatives. I'm not a fan of Polyev. I think he's full of BS, to be honest with you. And for example, there's some things he won't talk about that Maxime talks about, and these are things that were talked about years ago. So I find myself in a impasse because I can't find it for support a party that I don't fully align with. And I feel like the PPC is something I do 100% align with because they're not saying anything that is against common sense. And to anybody who argues that, I invite them to debate me because I don't see why the PPC can't be the majority government right now if it wasn't for other reasons like the social stigma and the Liberal Party and the Conservatives acting like they're the main two that you can vote for. And fringe minorities have a lot of power, whether people leave it or not. We do. So it all starts from somewhere. And Nigel Farage, I'll bring this up on the side, but Nigel Farage, for example, he started his party in the UK 20 years ago, if I'm correct. And look at them now; they take up about a good third of parliament. While they're not majority, they're still putting their voice in, and I have a feeling that they're going to become a majority as time goes on. So I wanted to start with something that was more of a grassroots movement, something that I actually believe in, and I feel like the conservatives would never follow the true Canadian ideals that we all need, especially when they're being globalists. I'm just going to say this outright: is they're all globalists, and they care more about everybody else except Canadians. So that was the main issue for sure. And so the PPC, I feel like, is much more Canadian based, Canada first, Canadian citizens first, and I don't see anything wrong with that.
No, great answer.
Thanks.
Um, I had a question. This is happening to me a lot lately. I should probably go see a neurologist. Um, I'm forgetting everything.
Don't worry, I have an answer. Don't worry.
So in Nanaimo, when you were volunteering,
Right.
What was like the number one pushback that you got? Was it, did they accuse the party of being racist? Was it the vote split
Oh yeah.
thing? What?
So I'll take you back a little bit. So the last election was 2021, if I'm correct, right? Like about 2, 3 years ago. Um, at the time, that's unfortunately when my father passed. So I was in the position where I couldn't visit him in the hospital, or they tried to not have me visit him. So when that was happening, I started getting more involved with the PPC because this was such BS to me that it was breaking my heart, and I felt like I had to do something. So I got involved with Stephen Welton, who was the Nanaimo candidate at the time. I think he is now this year as well. But I got involved with Stephen Welton, so we ended up doing some canvassing with him. I'm also, since I have video photo experience, I was helping him create some of his photo video material. And the initial onslaught that I got from being doing that was, as you said, I was racist, I was a Nazi, white supremacist. A lot of my college friends actually refused, unfollowed me on a lot of the social media, which it happens. But that was one, and then I it found it hard for me. I was an alumni with VIU, Vancouver Island University, and I found that that also got affected, which I have no idea how the university figured out I was working with the PPC, but they somehow found it. They gave me some issues as well with the alumni side of things. Nothing crazy, but just a notice, let's just say.
Wait,
And
can you talk more about that? Because alumni means you used to be a student there, right?
yeah, so I was graduated. I graduated 2019. So I still lived in Nanaimo for about 2 years after that as an alumni. So as my father passed away, I remember that became an issue as well with VIU. So they weren't too thrilled with the fact that I was volunteering with them, and still, I was still doing digital media studies,
Okay.
uh, like volunteer work. So I remember that became a thing, and I was like, What do you guys have to do with politics? You're a university. Focus on your students. Don't focus on anything else." So, but I'm sorry, I might be detracting from your question a little bit here, but essentially the reason I got into it is just yeah, after everything that happened with COVID and my father, I always wanted to do this. It felt like a calling to me.
Your father, I had a guest on and we were talking about like who's to blame here? Is it Justin Trudeau and the government for not letting people see their dying parents, or is it people like society accepting this? So, like,
Both.
did anybody sympathize with you?
Oh yeah, I have plenty of people who sympathized. It's not like I was up against the wall. It's just I think because we're in the West Coast, a lot of people were following the government's regulations. Even if they didn't agree with it, they wanted to follow it because they were worried about breaking the rules. So I found on my side here is that I had people that agreed with me but they wouldn't break the rules. For example, a few people, I'm free to say, I'll say this right now. I never got the vaccination personally. I never did it. However, I did work my own. I'm a photographer, and I can do Photoshop and all that. I can work my way around to get into certain areas, and some people wouldn't do it with me. They would rather get the shot than lie and get into certain areas. And they still said they supported me, but they still were so worried about the fallout. Where I was arguing, what's the fallout? Like, it's your bodily autonomy. You can say no. And I had a lot of that come against me right at the time. So yeah, sorry if I'm deterring from the from the question, but essentially, yeah, I didn't have too much fallout from anybody in my side over here. But just I saw that a lot of people in my area were not. They were more willing to go along with the way things were, even if the government mandated it, rather than against it. And while I had people agreeing with me to go against it, they weren't willing to go against it. So that was what I had to make a decision there, like, because I can't fully bend over and fall for this, what I call a communist regime.
I use that word a lot and people get angry at me and they always try to get
Mhm.
technical. They're like, in communism, the government owns all the property, but like apparently as long as you own up until 99%, it's not communist.
Yeah, apparently. I mean, it never works. I always ask, name one country where it's worked, and nobody can answer it. They'll say stuff like Sweden and Norway and all that, but those are free market capitalist countries. They're not communist. They're not so. They are socialist to a point, but they're not so democratic socialist like Canada is trying to become. And that's why I say is like you can get offended, but the facts don't, as Ben Shapiro says, facts don't care about your feelings. So, like, at the end of the day, Canada's always been more of a capitalist, with a bit of a social aspect country. But I think if we more align ourselves more with the states and we start doing more conservative outlets, I think we'll be a much better for it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with America going towards Trump. And
Mhm.
you can see the full on panic mode in the liberal administration.
That's great, isn't it? So they just don't know when to lose. That's the thing. It's the
Communists never
biggest.
do.
No, they don't. I mean, look, as a Canadian, I know Trump is much more pro-American, so things for us might not seem so great right off the bat. But once he gets in with the energy costs, and the gas prices, I think we'll see it. Like we'll see the difference in our prices moving forward. And people don't want to ignore that, but at the end of the day, if Trump can get in the states because he's pro-American, we should be able to get somebody in. Like I would say Maxime, who is pro-Canadian. I don't know why that's a bad thing to say, but I think a lot of our candidates, aside from him, do not care about Canada. Like why Trudeau focuses on India a lot with the immigration, China, that's the other one, and Polyev has not said a word. So
Yeah, the Conservative Party strategy. I see what he's doing. He just figures he's going to get a majority government, so just don't say anything. But
right.
it's kind of disturbing. It's like buying a product, but there's nothing on the packaging. Like you don't know what's inside.
No, I would agree. I 100% agree with that. I think what he's doing, as you said, is I think he's avoiding the conversation so he can get the votes. But Trudeau actually has a smart plan right now. Is he's even though he caused the issue, he's now playing the whole "we made a mistake, let's fix it." And for him, that might actually work in some stance with some people because at least in Vancouver, I've never met as many people as I have over here who will let their government screw up royally. And as long as the government admits they screwed up, they're like, okay, that's fine. Like, at least they admit it. I'm willing to trust them to fix it. And I look at them like, what? You want the, like, I don't get that. But I think that strategy will work with a good amount of Canadians just because Trudeau's starting to talk about, oh, we're going to lower immigration numbers. He won't say the number, though, but he's saying we'll lower the immigration numbers, and he knows that these diploma mills are causing the influx of mass immigrants coming over here, whereas Polyev won't say anything about it. So because he's still scared. He wants the votes when Trudeau is losing the votes. So he's willing to talk about it because Polyev won't. And that's the irony is that Maxime's been talking about it for 5 years, and but he's been called a racist. But unfortunately, because we're a fringe minority, many people are worried as if the next election is the last. So my argument is always like vote the fringe minority in, even if you get one MP into the parliament. That's all it takes to start moving everything forward. So, but yeah, I'm sorry, I must have forgotten your question. I end up went on a rant, but
It's the Alzheimer
yeah,
hour. The host and the
yeah.
guest have forgetfulness.
Well,
Um,
I'm a talkative person, unfortunately. So
that's okay. It's your hour. The analogy I give is like a balloon. So the Uniparty is kind of the balloon, and the PPC is like all these little pins, flying towards the balloon, and the
Yeah,
conservative establishment, the liberals are trying to keep it out because all it
yeah,
really
yeah,
takes is one of us to get a seat, and all hell is going to break loose for those guys.
yeah. That's true. I agree, 100%. I mean, you just need one loud mouth from the PPC side to start calling out all the conservative BS. And one of them right away, I would say, is the Paris Climate Accords. Um, Polyev talks about, oh, axe the tax, but he has no idea. He's talking about one tax. Like, we have plenty of carbon taxes that we're doing due to the Paris Climate Accords. So, and the fact that he won't even bring that up tells me right away he's just using that as one what would you want to call it, slogan to try and get people to vote for him, and he knows that because he's not going to get out of the. We're still Canada. We're very environmentally conscious. Unfortunately, we don't. We only emit probably less than 2% of the world's emissions. And at the end of the day, we the those this whole climate accord, all these climate taxes that we have with our country, it's not helping us. Where's the money going? Like it, you know what I mean? And the fact that Polyev won't talk about that, that's another reason why not to vote for him. And I wouldn't vote for Trudeau either, obviously, in that case, but just vote for the party that is actually talking about it, which is the PPC, is saying that all these environmental accords are they do nothing for our country. We have so many rich natural resources over here, right? So why are we not using them? Why are we exporting to other countries? And why does that make me the bad guy to say that, right? So
I'm from Iran, and
mhm,
that country, as bad as the government is, they at least have like the mental faculties to know to not tax the people, so they don't pay income tax, property tax. I don't even think there's a sales tax. They just don't get
no,
taxed. So all the revenue comes from the oil, right? So they steal
mm,
the people's oil and they spend it on terrorism. Okay, it's evil, but at least it's smart. Here, they're
right,
like, we're gonna steal the people's land. They close up crown land. You can't. There's no
yeah,
mining. There's no drilling. And then they turn around the people and they're like, by the way, you have to finance our BS projects, and
yeah.
they get away with it.
Yeah, and then you get the liberal side saying this is a good thing. Like, really? Like, where where's the money coming from? How are you gonna make this happen? And it's a lot of slogans, a lot of headline. And at the end of the day, Poilievre's talking about putting in, what every province gets a certain amount of money to build a certain amount of homes, and otherwise, if they don't do it, they won't get the money. And I'm like, we're rich with land, right? And a lot of it's crown. If you want to just start building on it, just do it. Like, give the provinces the permission to do it. Close the regulations so so the developers can build, and then let's just build the homes. But they're not willing to do that. Polyev just wants them to use whatever they have as it is. He's basically putting the provinces in a little bit of a bind because they don't have enough to build, and with all the regulation that they're putting on them. So I don't understand. I mean, it works for voters, but from a I'm a realtor, so I'm looking at it from a financial development perspective. Like, okay, point it out. Where should I build? Please tell me. Like, and he won't say that. So
Like I'm also of the mindset that like you need in BC, I think 96% of the land is locked up in crown land. And I don't want to
mhm,
get into the debate of how much of that is for First Nations, but whatever the
yeah,
percentage
yeah,
is, I think the argument goes like this. If we privatize that land and we give it back to the people that own it, they might sell it off to like the US, or before you know it, we're slaves. So why don't we give it to the
mhm.
government? Okay, fine, but
Wow,
we have a sovereign debt crisis right now. And at any
exactly,
point,
right?
if the Bank for International Settlements comes calling, well, the government has the right to sell off that land anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean that's where it comes down to, right? Is I'm not saying let's avoid all regulation, but there has to be a certain amount of if you want to expand and allow more people to come into the metropolitan area or BC in general, we have to build more. And if you're not going to give the land to build, then what's the point? What are we doing here? Right. And we have to have some regulation in regards to what you're saying, right? Let's not sell it overseas like Whistler, who I believe is owned by the states currently, or at least a US company. I might be wrong on that, but we need to have some sort of plan in place. And the problem is that nobody has a plan. Everybody's just trying to build on land that we already have zoned.
Yeah, it's a stupid idea, and it leads into this whole 15-minute city thing. If you're
I
bringing
don't
in
like it.
40 million people, sorry, if you double the
Yeah.
population, you're bringing in all these people, and you're not
Yeah,
opening up crown land, then
yeah,
they're going to get shoved into these cities.
they are. They are. Is because Ontario is being overcrowded with all the mass immigration. Trudeau's trying to send all these immigrants over to BC, Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. Quebec won't take any because their government, good for them, is at least being strong arm on it. Like, no. So he's just going to send a lot of these asylum seekers, a lot of these immigrants who don't share our Canadian values. They don't understand Canadian culture, and a lot of them are not, they're not coming here for the sake of that Canada needs them. And I'm sorry to say that, but we don't need a lot of these people. And what he's going to do is going to send them over to BC, and then we're going to have more of a population crisis in the next 2 3 years. And if you vote for anybody else, like NDP, Liberal, Conservative, they're going to allow it. So surprised when you're living in Vancouver downtown, and next year traffic is crazy. You can't find any place to rent. A lot more homeless people. So we need to fix this. It's not. We need to put a moratorium on this and solve our own home first.
I just like to point out that what you were just talking about right there, vote for the PPC, not the NDP. They
Hmm.
thrive on this because you bringing in all these people federally, and then they shove it over to the provincial government. So the NDP government says, "Holy moly, we have a housing problem. I guess we're going to have to tax you guys and build,
Oh
subsidized
no!
housing." And so
Right.
the solution, the problem becomes the solution.
Yeah. I mean, I see. I would say one of the comments I'd agree with. It's all by design. So like Trudeau, I believe he enacted this years ago, when immigration levels were at an okay streamline, and he knew this was going to be the problem 10 years later, or 5 10 years later. And he's just banking on the fact that Canadians were too nice and we don't want to be seen as racist and we don't want to be the bad guy. But at the end of the day, if we don't have the housing, we don't have the supply to accommodate this. And I know, speaking from experience, my parents had to prove their worth to get in here. So how is that fair when I see a teenager who's 15, 16, wanted to work at Tim Hortons, but a 30, 40-year-old guy from India is all this take the job instead because he's willing to work the minimum wage. So it's it's um, it's a problem. And sorry, you were at what was the question exactly you
Stop asking me. I keep forgetting. Um,
asked?
I guess I was saying the problem is yeah, the problem, which is
so
government,
they're
becomes the solution.
so they're creating the problem, is what I'm saying. They're creating the problem, and the solution really is a moratorium. And that's the bad. It's right now in this country. That's what the bad thing to say, but it's the only option we have. You put a moratorium on immigration. You have to what is it? Get the people out here who are here illegally or who are here on false pretenses. If you came here on a PR and you're working as a supervisor in Tim Hortons, no, I'm sorry, you are not qualified to be a Canadian. You do not have the skills that anybody else could do over that is worth more than anybody else could do over here. So we need to fix the problem with immigration. That's the first start, and I guarantee you, if you start doing a mass deportation, which look, I would be for, but at the same time, I'm not sure Maxine or PPC would do like Trump is planning to do. But if we put a moratorium on immigration, it would solve a lot of our issues, especially with housing and jobs, right? That I think a lot of people won't recognize. And corporations are taking advantage of these immigrants because it's not fair to them either when they come over here. They're working for biscuits, and you can't live in a home for 15 bucks, 14, 15 bucks an hour, wherever the minimum wage is. You can't buy a home like that. You can't rent a home like that. So why are we doing a disservice to immigrants on top of our own Canadian citizens for it, right? And if you take the mass immigration away, you force corporations to pay a living wage. And if the corporations don't want to pay that living wage, that's when you can go to the government and ask for assistance. So like this shouldn't be a hard thing to understand. And I think that's the problem is Canada's focused on being too nice. And
We're
we got to
kind
get
of
out of
doing
that.
it. We're doing it the wrong way. Like um, rather than giving money to the citizenry, which I don't necessarily agree with, but UBI,
Yeah.
we're giving it to the corporations. So,
Mm,
like, you're bringing in these temporary foreign workers and you're subsidizing their wages at 50%. That subsidy comes from the people that the corporations don't want to employ. So,
mm.
rather than it's like a negative UBI, they're
That's
taking
what I'm
money.
saying is like if we can, that's why you need a good government in there, like the PPC, who would say, okay, time to deport them because we see what you're doing, right? You need to hire domestic Canadians who actually need a job, right, and can actually do the work because we all know they always use the excuse Canadians won't do the work. They will do the work if you pay them enough, right? And a lot of people don't want to do that because they've gotten so used to the immigration prices.
You know what policy the PPC should adopt? Blanket
Hmm.
amnesty for all the temporary foreign workers and then deport the corporations. Take the CEOs of Tim Horton and send them to India.
Well, send them over there, see how they
Yeah.
do, you know? And
Uh,
if they open up their own little Amazon over there, good for them.
yeah, yeah. Then maybe the Indian government can subsidize them for minimum wage.
There you go. And they probably would, right? Over there.
Uh,
But that's why I'm saying we need to focus on our country first, and we weren't built on that, right? So we're very much a democratic country where we should prioritize Canadians first, give Canadians jobs, housing, and because of the mass immigration and I don't know if the corporations are a huge fault at this, but the mass immigration is what caused a lot of this housing issues to happen with the prices and foreign investors. Like if they hadn't done this, we would have prices closer to the US for housing. And speaking from a realtor perspective right now. Because yeah, right in Vancouver downtown is $900,000. That's not fair. It's compare that to the States. There it's even less no matter what city you pick. Maybe on the West Coast it's slightly we're still paying too much for Vancouver compared to other countries and cities.
when I hear things like in the '60s, tradesmen could pay off a small size house in 2 years with their 2 year salary, and then
Yeah.
today it's like 40 years. Something has gone terribly wrong. It's a problem with people. They assume life just naturally gets worse. Like they just assume inflation is something that happens.
Yeah. Well, I mean, disinflation, which would help. So, like that's what Maxine's talking about is we got to balance the budget, right? And if you have, I believe it's disinflation is what when the inflation slowly goes down over time. So you can save. It is not impossible to think of that way of life because that the way the liberals and the Democrats and the leftists were going, everything's just going to our monetary value is going to go down. But if we figure out a way to disinflate everything, which I've said before, start with mass immigration and then go to jobs and housing from there. You can guarantee prices will stay at a standstill for the next average area, but we wouldn't see an increase as we did in the last year and 2 years, 30% in prices.
We need to. I think that Ron Paul said this, but we need some really basic policies to get balanced budgets. For example, if
Mhm.
you're part of a government and you run a budget deficit, you can never run for public office again. Just do that.
I like that. So you got to be accountable, right?
Yeah. Chris, we're almost approaching an hour, so why don't you
Yeah.
tell the audience how they can learn more about you and where they can follow you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can find me on the PPC candidate website. On ppccandidates.com. And then if you look in Vancouver Centre, you'll find me there. I'm also on Twitter/X, just Chris Varga, PPC Vancouver Centre. I'm also on Instagram as well, Chris Varga PPC. So feel free to reach out to me there. But I'm very active on social media. I'm in the marketing side of things. So if you're living in downtown, Vancouver, Cole Harbor, yeah, downtown Cole Harbor, Stanley Park. I even want to say Yaletown's not in my district, but I'm in around that area as well. Feel free to give me a shout. I'm happy to meet anybody to discuss. I'm also very happy to debate anybody who disagrees with me. My plan is to hopefully set up a little bit of a booth and similar to like a turning point say thing, and just I would love to. Yeah, I'm working on that right now, but something just to start some sort of dialogue. And I just love. I know people in Vancouver are very anti. There are certain things they're anti, but I refuse to believe that because I think fiscally, a lot of Vancouverites are more PPC than I believe. And so yeah, I'm in the area, and feel free to. Yeah, those are the three platforms. So Twitter X or Twitter/X, Instagram, Facebook is another one. I have a page as well, and the website.
Well, you heard it, folks. If anybody wants to debate Chris, send me an email, info@paymentascari.ca.
Let's do it.
Oh,
So
we got a piece of advice for you. Follow back people who follow you so they can message you.
I will do that. Thank you. I haven't checked it recently, but I will. I will definitely do that.
Thanks for the tip, Jody. Well, Chris, I'll let you go, and I will probably see you when we're door knocking for Mr. Kennedy.
Sounds good. I look forward to it. Thanks. Appreciate it.
No worries, Chris. Have a wonderful day.
You too, sir.
Bye.